$65 billion, managed by one man. For decades, no one checked. And when they finally did, almost none of it existed. This is Fallen Fortunes, where we follow the money all the way down. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was not some shadowy figure operating out of a back room. He was a Wall Street institution, a market pioneer, a former chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. His firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, occupied 3 floors of the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan. It had 2 divisions, the legitimate trading operation on 1 floor, and on the 17th floor, the investment advisory business, the one that almost no one on the outside ever saw clearly. At its peak, his advisory clients believed they held $65 billion in managed assets. That number is larger than the GDP of several countries. It was also, in large part, a fiction. His client list read like a who's who of money and influence. The Elie Wiesel Foundation for Humanity, Banco Santander, Steven Spielberg's Wunderkinder Foundation, hedge funds, European banks, and thousands of individual families who had trusted Madoff with their life savings and retirement accounts. And then there was Harry Markopolos. In the year 2000, Markopolos was a financial analyst working for a Boston investment firm. His boss asked him to reverse engineer Madoff's strategy, to figure out how he generated his returns so they could replicate them. Within 4 hours, Markopolos concluded it was mathematically impossible. He documented his findings and sent them to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC did nothing. He would send them evidence again. In 2001, in 2005, in 2007. He titled one submission, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." 29 pages of documented evidence. The SEC still did nothing. But here's where it gets worse, because for 8 more years, the money kept flowing in. What made Madoff so convincing wasn't just his reputation, it was the numbers themselves. Year after year, his fund returned roughly 10 to 12%. Steady, consistent, almost never negative. The S&P 500 would crash 20%. Madoff's clients saw a gain. The dot-com bubble burst. Madoff's clients barely felt it. Markets collapsed in 2001 and 2002, and his statements showed smooth upward lines. That consistency was exactly what drew people in. And it should have been the first alarm. No legitimate investment strategy produces those results across every market condition. Not one. Real markets have volatility. Real portfolios have down years. But Madoff had cultivated something more powerful than a track record. He had cultivated mystique. Access to his fund was not open to everyone. Investors were brought in through referrals, through feeder funds in Europe and Latin America, through wealth managers who vouched for him as if they were granting entry to an exclusive club. Being a Madoff client felt like an achievement. Investors didn't ask too many questions. They were afraid of being cut off. His auditor was a 3-person accounting firm operating out of a strip mall in Rockland County, New York. They were supposed to be auditing billions of dollars in trades. Almost no one looked at that detail closely enough, and that was the architecture of the trap: prestige, exclusivity, and returns that felt too good to question. Now here is how the fraud actually worked. Because most people believe Bernard Madoff was a genius trader who eventually cut corners and got caught. Court records and the findings of bankruptcy trustee Irving Picard tell a very different story. Investigators found that Madoff's investment advisory business had not executed real trades for years, possibly decades. There were no actual stock purchases. No options strategies, no split-strike conversion plays, which was the technique he claimed to use. It was a pure Ponzi scheme. The oldest financial fraud in the book. New investor money came in. Some of it was paid out to existing investors as fake returns. The rest sat in a single JP Morgan Chase account number 703, according to court filings, from which Madoff drew funds to pay redemptions and operating costs. His back-office staff fabricated trade confirmations and account statements. They reverse-engineered the results. They would look at what the market had done, then construct fictional trades that would explain the returns Madoff had already promised. The paperwork looked real. The trades were not. One of Madoff's key lieutenants, Frank DePascali, who served as a principal operator on the 17th floor, later pleaded guilty and testified that there had been no real trading in the investment advisory division for as far back as he could remember. Markopolos had identified the core impossibility in 2000. He noted that Madoff claimed to use a strategy that required trading options on the S&P 100 index. But the total volume of those options on the entire market wasn't large enough to accommodate the size of Madoff's reported positions. It was arithmetically impossible for the trades to have taken place. The SEC received that analysis, and for 8 years, they opened inquiries, conducted brief examinations, and found nothing. In part because investigators never independently verified whether the trades actually existed. Here is the mechanism in plain language. Rob Peter to pay Paul. Manufacture the statements. Never let too many people ask for their money back at once. And pray that the market keeps generating enough new believers to keep the cycle going. For 17 years, at minimum, it worked. In September 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. Credit markets froze. Investors across the world began pulling money out of everything they could reach. Madoff's clients started submitting redemption requests. $7 billion in withdrawals came in within weeks. That was money Madoff did not have. The account that held client funds contained a fraction of what was owed. There was no new money coming in fast enough to cover it. In early December 2008, Madoff told his sons, Mark and Andrew, who worked in the firm's legitimate trading division, that the investment advisory business was, in his words, one big lie. He intended to pay out remaining funds as bonuses before turning himself in. His sons consulted a lawyer that same night. The following morning, December 10th, they contacted the FBI. Federal agents arrived at Madoff's Manhattan penthouse apartment on December 11th. He did not deny it. According to the criminal complaint, he told agents there was no innocent explanation. He was arrested the same day. The scale of what investigators found was staggering. Account statements showed approximately $65 billion in client holdings. The actual cash that could be recovered was a small fraction of that. Trustee Irving Picard later determined that real principal money investors had actually deposited amounted to approximately $17 billion. The rest was fictional profit, compounded on paper over decades. Approximately 37,000 victims filed claims. They included Holocaust survivors, retirees, charities, hospitals. The Elie Wiesel Foundation lost $15 million, essentially its entire endowment. Thousands of individuals lost everything. In June 2009, Bernard Madoff was sentenced to 150 years in federal prison. Judge Denny Chin called the fraud extraordinarily evil. Madoff offered no mitigating argument. He died in a federal correctional institution in North Carolina in April 2021 at the age of 82. Frank DePascali pleaded guilty and cooperated with prosecutors. He died of lung cancer in 2015 before sentencing. Several other Madoff employees were convicted, including operations manager Daniel Bonventre and account managers Annette Bongiorno and Joanne Krupi. Irving Picard, as bankruptcy trustee, spent years clawing back funds from feeder funds, banks, and investors who had withdrawn more than they deposited. By 2023, his office had recovered and distributed more than $14 billion to victims. A partial but significant recovery. The SEC's failure drew a congressional investigation. The agency was found to have received credible, detailed warnings from Markopolos and others going back to 2000. Internal reviews concluded the SEC had lacked the financial expertise to evaluate quantitative fraud, and that investigators had deferred too readily to Madoff's reputation. The scandal accelerated regulatory reforms. The SEC restructured its enforcement division. Congress expanded whistleblower protections and financial incentives through the Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, directly addressing the failure to act on Markopolos' warnings. As of 2023, the Madoff Victim Fund, administered by the Department of Justice, had approved distributions of over $4 billion additional dollars to victims who were not covered by the bankruptcy proceedings. The money recovered will never equal what was lost. Not the savings, not the foundations, not the years. $65 billion, 37,000 victims, 150 years in prison, and 8 years of ignored warnings that could have stopped it. If this story should be documented, subscribe, so the next one reaches you. Which collapse should we cover next? Tell me in the comments.